Well, hello everybody. I'm Gary from Lantana Removal, Queensland, and here we are at a job up near Dundas. So this is a creek that runs through a property where these lovely people bought this land. And as you can see, the Lantana through this area on this flat country has a fairly substantial hold on this watercourse, and then continues up into the hillsides up above it. One of the greatest problems is that I get to meet a lot of people who unfortunately have already purchased properties and have not wanted to spend any money on, or have elected to not spend any money on getting prices prior to the purchase on how much the problems are going to cost them. And that's a big problem when you're paying top dollar for land and you're trusting people like your Prime Minister and your premiers and your councils. And as is the case with Dundas and the Somerset Council, your whole area is written off. In actual fact, that's right across our state. One of the biggest issues that we find where people don't pay for the services to do these type of mapping and identification programs, the sheer scale of the cost of this material is so large that people are purchasing properties that might be worth half of what they are actually paying for them. Can you imagine what happens with the bank when you're the only person who was willing to purchase it, and it has so much Lantana on it that in some cases, just last week, same as this couple, guy contacts us and he's got 600 acres up near Kingaroy, and of that 420 acres of it is Lantana. He's purchased that property, with that infestation. See on the right hand side there how many of those dead cows these people have. They've lost six calves in the last week. That's after the real estate told them that Lantana is not a big issue. And you look at it from that point of view, and you see, looking down this surface here, so this is the high country above that creek area, and you can see how infested it is all the way down and then across that next people's paddocks and up the hill on the other side. So it saddens me when you see these dead calves here just to the middle right of the screen. Unfortunately, you have to graphically show people the consequences of purchasing properties with Lantana on it. And look straight down to the left in the top left-hand corner of this. You can see the road goes through there, and you can see that bright dark green infestations all along that fence line. Now that's all Lantana. It's all noxious and toxic weeds of many different varieties. And you can see on the other side of the road, that's all council land, and they'd actually fine you if you went out there and tried to clear your property boundary. So it's illegal for them to release this material into the environment, and your prime ministers and your premiers have been aware of this for 12 months, and they're still playing the corruption game of trying to cover up the full magnitude of how many billions of dollars this actually costs our communities. These people only just purchased this property, and they have a massive problem because they back onto the national parks here. And the national parks that's where all this infestation has come spewing down out of the national parks. So, and then they're getting it on the other side from the councils. But this shows you graphically how Lantana moves across surfaces. You see how it's based around these trees? So it then gets a hold and then climbs those trees, and it'll kill all the trees on that surface. And that then creates an even faster movement down through the actual property, because then it has water pushing it downhill. So it starts at the creeks. It really gets a go on there. Really gets healthy, vibrant growth, seeding 6, 10, whatever times a year. So 3,600 plants from one single plant. And then the birds pick it up and they fly it up to the ridge lines like this. And although it's a marriage of convenience between the birds and the plants, this then has the speed. See this big tree here, this ironbark? You can see how all of that material is choking out the base of that tree. And that can be gums, it can be all sorts of different species of trees. But then you see how it then just chokes that material out and then starts to climb the trees and then kills the trees on top of that. On this specific property, they have a very serious issue coming for them because there's a Lantana dieback in our natural bushlands where it's killing all of our gum and eucalypt forestry, and the government's completely trying to cover all of that up. And it's actually caused by the bell miner bird ending up in plague proportions in high volume Lantana infestations. And then they chase away all the other birds that would eat the insects that are crippling the trees and destroying our forestry. It's that bad that our government has turned around and said, oh, we'll just go in there and we'll just drop and clear fall the whole forestry and take the trees before the trees are rendered worthless. But you know, there's a clear indication with the greenies of just how bad that situation is. So these poor people bought this property only recently, and now they have an enormous costly battle on their hands, and they've already lost about $6,000 worth of cattle in a week on something that they were advised was low risk by the real estates and other people they made inquiries with. Well, it's not real low risk at that level. But that's the reason why you should spend this money before you actually purchase a property, whether it's $1 million property, which we're seeing many $1.2 million properties selling for almost half of their value because of these infestations on the Lantana. And when you look at it, that 620 acre property with 420 acres of it covered in Lantana, in the type of terrain that that gentleman has, you're looking anywhere, you know, in the high, you know, $300,000 to $500,000 problem. So what happens when the bank wants to sell you up because you can't make a go of it because the land is so badly infested? And you can't use old school practices of earth moving, land clearing practices. They've all been banned. So you can't physically even tend to the problem. Your premier in Queensland has got your hands so well tied that there's no way you can protect your asset. So what is the future for a person who purchases a property, pays too much for it, pays the going rate for the land if it wasn't infested, and it's a $500,000 problem on $1 million block of land, and they borrowed most of the money? It's guaranteed to be Australia's worst historical tragedy that in modern times. And our Premier and Prime Ministers are busy covering this stuff up. A $75 billion problem at 10 million hectares, which under the current levels of where they have this material growing will blow out to be 50 million hectares and $300 billion in the next 10 years. And your government has not even bothered to ask the questions. Your councils are being encouraged to swap over to what they call a risk assessment based program, which currently means that all that'll happen is they'll say Lantana's too big a problem, we don't have the funding for it, so therefore we don't do any work in it. Now they've written to me with that information before the business ever came out about this low risk and this risk assessment based process. But once they try to push this risk assessment based process through, our ecology is going to collapse. There's bell miner birds on this property where they're in this bushland. If that's not dealt with very quickly, they are going to lose huge amounts of their bushland. And the whole of the forestry that surrounds these people, the national parks forestry, is completely blanketed out in this material. So anybody purchasing properties in those areas are in absolute hell. You're going to see many more films in the next couple of days that show even more graphically lands that have been taken back over by the National Park Service, who refused to give me proper access to film the levels of the infestations on the actual properties, because none of these governmental departments want to actually admit that the water moves this material in the manner that it does. But this graphically shows how this material floods down these hillsides and picks up speed and covers land by a much greater speed and rate and propagation rate. So when you're driving along in your car next, look out your window left and right and have a look at the creek crossings and the creeks, and you'll see Lantana absolutely everywhere around you. And your premiers, prime ministers are all covered by the same corruption. Their biosecurity cover-ups. This is a national disaster, and it's a treasonous act for these people not to bother to try and find out even the information or do anything about this. Anyway, look, that's a short video on this. I'll show you much more because there's a lot more filming I did. There's those poor dead cows there. And thank you very, very much for dropping in, and I will show you more as we go through. Thank you very much. I'm Gary, Lantana Removal Queensland, 0449 986 880, and talk to you soon. Thank you. Bye.